All right, everyone. We're going to now move to item 8.1, found on page 7 of the report. And if staff could just come up to the table to walk us through the district plan.
Fanfare.
Momentous moment, Jason. Yeah.
There's the cannon.
G'day, Jason. Hand it over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Councillor Coots. This is a momentous occasion. There's no two ways about it. Today we are asking this committee on behalf of Council to give its approval to the proposed district plan in its entirety. And before I get to the report itself, I did just want to acknowledge that so many people have invested so much of their time, effort and intelligence to get us to this point. It has been a long process. It began with work that informed the proposed district plan when it was notified in 2012, and it continued on for many years. So I would like to acknowledge all of the efforts of past and current elected members, staff, and I have some of my staff here today, Matt and Laura, and staff that have gone before us and before me. Indeed. That's right. And I'll continue just for a little bit longer. I want to acknowledge too the efforts of iwi over the years. They did a lot of work to inform the plan. They continued to inform the plan throughout the process, and we look forward to working with iwi as we move forward beyond this point. And submitters, those who spent the time to read the plan and put forward their thoughts and were prepared to attend the hearing and put forward their case. To all of those people, thank you very much. So, turning to the decision that we are seeking from Council today, it's actually a relatively straightforward decision when you get to the stage of the process, and that process is of course determined by central government and it's set out in Schedule 1 of the RMA. Council is required to make this decision. So once you've completed the appeals process, once you've finished all your variations, once you've completed all of your minor amendments under Clause 16, we reach this stage, and under Clause 17 of Schedule 1 of the RMA, Council is required to give its final approval. What that means is, subject to your decision today being in the affirmative, staff can exercise their delegated authorities to move forward and to publicly notify a date from which the proposed district plan will become operative, and that will be the day when from that point there will be a single district plan for the district. It will include, and these provisions will continue on, those specific coastal provisions that were in the previously operative district plan. Those will continue on and will continue to be a part of the planning framework. But for the rest of the operative district plan as it is now, that will fall aside, and the proposed district plan as you see it now will become the operative district plan. A simpler regulatory framework for all, and I'm sure that will be welcomed. The other implication of that operative date is that private plan change requests will be able to be lodged on and from that date. So the decision we are seeking today is an approval under Clause 17 for the district plan, proposed district plan in its entirety. And then if that decision is made, there will be a procedural step that will happen after this meeting where a seal is affixed to the proposed district plan. The report also notes that the 30th of June is a date there or thereabouts that staff intend to exercise their delegated authority to publicly notify as the date from which the proposed district plan would become operative, and that staff are working on and will complete before that date a suite of amendments in response to the national planning standards, which would have effect also from that operative date. So that's really, in a nutshell, the paper, and a little bit of an acknowledgement of the work that's been completed to get us to that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Just before I move to questions, and thinking about moving and seconding, are there elected members, councillors that have been involved in the process that shouldn't be moving and seconding in terms of the recommendations? Okay, I just want to make one for myself, just double checking that. So question from Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you. My question relates to coastal hazard provisions. So can you clarify that the proposed district plan will be made operative without any coastal hazard provisions? And what do you plan to do in the future about coastal hazard provisions? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Randall. So during the process for developing the proposed district plan, some provisions were withdrawn by decision from Council. Some provisions in 2014 were withdrawn, and then some others in 2017. What that means is that you are approving today, it's the decision that we're seeking, those provisions that are still in the proposed district plan, and those operative district plan provisions that cover that matter, and they have been identified, a specific suite of provisions. They're on our website for everybody to see. Those will continue on past the operative date. They'll continue to apply until such time as they're replaced through a future plan change process. And that process will be informed by the Takatai Kapiti Community Assessment Panel process, which will be underway shortly. So within that process, their scope, if you like, is to look at that issue, coastal hazards, and to give recommendations to Council, which will guide the development of a plan change that will eventually lead to an update, a replacement of those operative district plan provisions.
I can just, through you, Mr. Chair, just in terms of that coastal hazard assessment process that Jason mentioned. So yeah, that has actually started. So we have a chair. So the Right Honourable Jim Bolger is the chair of the Community Assessment Panel. The applications for membership closed yesterday, I think, the day before, in terms of the panel members themselves. And so there will be interviews, I think it's next week, Wednesday, to look to provide the 6 community members to that panel. And then that process will start proper in terms of the overall work program. So looking over the next 8 to 12 months to look to define or provide a recommendation back through to Council as to what will potentially then be used to fit into the plan change that Jason's talked about in terms of the coastal area.
Thank you, Sean. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's almost going on to be 10 years since we started and there's a statutory requirement for us to review the operative district plan. So when we become operative, straight away we have to go into review status. And am I to understand that we will be looking to a rolling review, which means all the other changes that you're talking about will come into play in terms of national policy statements, highly productive soils, and also the climate change issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's, I guess, 2 parts to my response. The first part is that Section 79 of the Resource Management Act does require a review of provisions that are 10 years old. But that date, the starting time for that, when the clock starts ticking and starts counting up those 10 years, is actually from the date that the plan is made operative, not from the date that it's actually notified as a proposed plan. So in effect, that clock will start on the 30th of June 2021 or thereabouts. But in the sense of your second point, yes, absolutely. And the long-term plan, the draft long-term plan that's currently out for consultation, does provide resourcing for a rolling review of the proposed district plan, soon to be operative, I hope. The urban development plan change work, yes, that is a significant part of that program. We are looking at a notification of a plan change in 2022. That is what the National Policy Statement for Urban Development requires of us as a Tier 1 authority. But there are also other plan changes. We've already touched upon the coastal plan change. There are others as well. So it's a fulsome program.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, a couple of questions. So, given you're saying before that the 1999 coastal hazard provisions carry through until they're replaced by a plan change, are those coastal hazard provisions consistent with the 2010 New Zealand policy statement on coastal, whatever it was, the NZCPS?
That's one of the things that we will need to check through the review. Given that they were, of course, produced before the 2010 New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, there's a fair chance that they're not. And so part of the process for reviewing them is to make sure that what we replace them with will be.
So then is there a legal risk to council if we make this plan operative and the coastal hazard stuff in there isn't consistent with the NZCPS? Are we sort of opening ourselves up to trouble?
I don't believe you are. This certainly has been a topic, as you can imagine, which we have worked with our legal advisors closely on for some time. And we are confident that a decision to approve today is consistent with all of the expectations that the Environment Court has provided, and with your requirements as a council who needs to exercise its functions under the RMA. So really the key area if you look at is Clause 17, and in particular Clause 17 Part 1, and it does say quite black and white that approval shall be made once this stage is reached. So once appeals are resolved, once all variations and amendments are completed, this is a decision that needs to be made.
So I guess when they put that together, the idea was that all the legal risks have been hopefully taken care of by then, but maybe, yeah. Okay, no.
Mr. Chairman, can I just pick up on what Councillor Compton has raised? Is it correct to understand that this is a process issue, and the process issue overrides a national direction? Because the RMA, the laws come in tiers, right? Higher ones, low ones. So there's a national direction being set in this area. Are you saying that the process we are in court overrides that? Because you will have concrete issues that come up from coastal inhabitants that will raise issues. Is that a viable legal position to have?
So I think it's important to bear in mind that the NZCPS requirements are still required to be considered through the resource consent process and things like that, even though they're not reflected in the currently proposed plan, soon to be operative plan. They are also, in addition to considering the current operative plan coastal provisions. The other thing to bear in mind in terms of your ability to make the decision today is that council can agree to make all or part of a plan operative. So going back to the point that Councillor Randall raised about whether or not there was going to be a gap, there is no gap because there are existing provisions that will remain. Does that answer part of your question?
We can decide.
Right, so I don't see any further questions. I just want to check with His Worship the Mayor whether he would like to move the recommendations as a significant piece of our organisation. It would be appropriate to be moved by His Worship. So that's recommendations 48 through to 50.2, found on page 11, seconded by Councillor Holborough. Right of introduction, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was around when the district plan was proposed district plan, and one of the key areas is, of course, had it been a draft, it would have made a difference. It wasn't. Strategic mistake, I think it was. This process has gone through a huge angst to the community, to the benefit of busloads of lawyers. But I suppose that's economic activity for some people. But there's been a huge amount of work, like Jason, you've outlined, in terms of the ranks of council expertise that have been engaged in this process has been long and arduous. But finally we've arrived at a stage where we can actually say, look, we've got a operative district plan. And I like to touch the fact that at this particular stage, we have absolutely no ability to make any changes. I read paragraph 18. Because this is a compulsory procedural step, the option of refusing to approve the plan is not available. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's sleepwalk in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor, I thought it was Compton, but it's Councillor McCann and then Councillor Compton.
Now, with your permission, I think this sums it up far better than I could possibly do. Let's hope it works. Oh no, it's not going to work. Only just. I would like to suggest that this is a momentous decision, but it also allows for a lot of change that we're looking forward to in our community, and private plan changes and the rolling walls that you've been discussing are really, really important for us to be able to, if I can now stop it, to progress towards some of the things that we've been talking about in the housing continuum. So I'm really glad that we've got to this stage, albeit the length of that movie, it seems, played out in real time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. It's not the first time a cell phone's gone off in this chambers. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Just picking up on a comment the Mayor made there about this process has involved busloads of lawyers. I guess that's where sort of my questions were coming in, the concern about trying to make sure we avoid still having busloads of lawyers, because that's obviously an enormous expense for our ratepayers, but also for the people on the other side of this who do have genuine concerns that they're trying to get addressed. So I guess, taking on board the advice you've given us today in relation to that, and sort of acknowledging that, like the Mayor said, that there is a process that now that's has to sort of, I guess, steamroll along here. I guess the onus on us from this point, when this is made operative going forward, is to make sure we engage with those groups that are interested in those issues that we still need to address in good faith, so that we avoid going back to where we were throughout the process of this. Because I think it's really important that we do use this as an opportunity to reset that conversation, work with the community, and make sure that when we come to these the changes that we're looking at, especially around the coastal hazard stuff, that we look to partner with the community as much as possible to make this happen, and hopefully that will happen through the community assessment panel process. So.
And Councillor Holborough.
Yeah, with your leave, Mr. Chair, I'd like to actually share a karakia at this point. Nā te kune te pupuke, nā te pupuke te hirihihiri, nā te hihiri te mahara o te hinengaro. And this was a karakia that was provided by Rako Te Ora Te Maipi, and it was the introduction to the review of the district plan provisions for Māori, a vision for the future, which was just one of many pieces of work that went on. And I don't remember the name of the the actual Māori consultation group, iwi consultation group that was set up, but they spent countless hours, that particular group of people, reviewing the district plan, and it was, just follow on from what Jason said earlier, it was just one of many groups that were set up to do work into this district plan. The commissioner panel being just one of those, and I'd like to acknowledge our former councillors Diane Amundsen and Mike Cardiff who sat on that panel, and I don't know how many hundreds of hours of work went into that, but I know how many hours just goes into just a hearing about one issue, much less an entire district plan. So I'd actually describe it as an ultra marathon that went on during that time. And also the other commissioners, Alistair Aburn, who so ably chaired that panel, Maria Pomare, who was the iwi representative, and her input was just incredible, and David McMahon. And I sat in on some of those hearings, and the quality of the thinking on that panel and the depth of the questioning of submitters and the insight they had and that they gained through those some of them very well thought out and well considered submissions and further submissions was just outstanding. And the council support through that whole process also was absolutely impeccable. And also the experts who were involved and who gave their advice and expertise into the process. So I just think it would be remiss not to acknowledge all those people from a governance perspective as well. And the translation of that, or the thought that Korodon had when he provided that karakia, it says, from a space of unlimited potential there comes a thought. Thought gives birth to a concept that requires structure and limbs, a concept that can then receive the energy it requires to draw people in and become living. This then requires the input of the multitudes and the energy of those dedicated to completing the task.
Thank you, Janet. Councillor Randall.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'd just like to endorse the great comments that Councillor Compton just made, and they're important. They're important statements, and I hope council staff take note of them and follow up on them.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other names up on the screen, so I'm going to go back to His Worship the Mayor as a right of reply. And just before I do, just mindful of the massive task that has been undertaken and the work that you and your team have done in the background as well. And so I don't want to understate that, but I guess there's a difficult way to sort of quantify the work that the team have put into that. So thanks, Jason, to you and your team. Your Worship the Mayor.
Just a very short sentence, I suppose. Thank you to the last leg of the marathon that you haven't dropped the baton. Well done.
All right, so I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Just bear with me, team, as I just flick back to the agenda. So we've already addressed item 8.2. We're now moving on to 8.3 and just invite Terry and Ninka up to the table who are going to walk us through the report found on page 66 of your agenda. Welcome to the table.
Good morning, all. I don't know that there's a lot of advantage in walking you through the report. I presume you'll have read it, and happy to take it as read and just answer any questions. One thing I will say is that we had a report back on the 3rd of December, as you'll remember, about the proposed new electricity contract at that stage, and it talks about the outcome of that. The decision was made to decline the offers that were received then. Our current electricity contract expires at the end of June, so it's pretty critical that we make a good decision on this one today, because you're going to need a confirmed supply from the 1st of July.
Thank you, Terry. So let's open up for questions, either Mr. Burns or Mr. Burns.
Yeah, you say in the report that there is a difference with the offers you've had and the original offer. Roughly, in terms of percent, what is the difference?
I don't have those figures in front of me. We decided just to think as things had moved on. We decided not to spend too much time looking backwards to see what the cost impacts were of the decision that was made in December. We just looked at what the best offers were currently on the table, given the current market conditions.
I think Sean wants to have a comment on that, but just to add to Terry's response, I guess from my reading of the report and the talks with staff, is the key difference here is the length of the term as well, which was quite different than the length of term proposed in the original contract. So, all the other contract might have been cheaper at face value over a longer period of time, could have been more expensive. But I'm going to hand it over to Sean, who might say the same or even add more to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just going to add, I don't have the exact figures, but certainly the proposal that's on the table today is more expensive than the one that was provided as part of the all government process. But as the Chair's mentioned, I think the duration of that offer or that contract was only 2.5 years. So it may well have been cheaper for those 2.5 years, but potentially we would have been subject to a much greater change in 2.5 years' time when we look to enter into a new contract. This contract, the time of use aspect to it is a 5-year term, which we believe gives us much more certainty in a longer term around those rates, and is within what we'd set in terms of the budget through the LTP as well, because we, if you recall, we retained the what we thought may be the potential increase as the budget, just in case we did get into a scenario as we face at the moment. So there is a potential in future years to maybe look to reduce that budget, because the current contract has CPI actually included in those rates. So therefore, again, in terms of future use, if we are sitting where we think we might be, there is an opportunity to look to either reinvest some of that saving in future years or to offset that cost in terms of rates potentially. But at the moment, we're suggesting that we enter the contract and then look at that over the next year in terms of what our consumption looks like, because there's always a potential that there's I guess a bad year or an increased usage that would impact on that saving.
And I guess another way to think about it would be similar to a mortgage rate, and considering taking a 2-year rate, but then not knowing what rates might be in 2 years' time when you come to renew your rate, and taking a longer term rate, say a 5-year rate at a slightly higher, but more known and benefits over the longer period. I think also the report says it gives us a bit more flexibility as well than the previous one. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you. Look, just clarifying what you said then, Sean, that this has been allowed for, this price increase in the long-term plan as per... Okay, that's great. That was the question there.
To clarify, it's within budget.
Yep. Also, look, I just wanted to query, you've got the time of use being at 75% for our big stuff and the non-half hourly rate NHH for the small stuff. Is there any reason why we don't do the whole lot under the time of use as such, or is that spreading risk, or is there sort of contractual...
It's basically the way the electricity market works, that they only offer time of use contracts for the larger supplies. So if the really high volume usage, for all the smaller bits and pieces, they only offer non-half hourly rates.
That's me. I did note Meridian is from a climate perspective, it's all renewable energy, which I think is great. But I noticed they do a EV charging network and that sort of scenario there as well. So is there leeway for us to be building, I suppose, part of that, building that relationship with Meridian ongoing in that space as well?
Yeah, we installed 3 new EV chargers. They were commissioned, I think, November, December last year. That was through Meridian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we'll be looking to extend that again using Meridian.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Compton.
I can answer that earlier question about what the increase was. It was 1.9988%. So it's slightly above what the contact offer was, but well below what the Meridian offer was last year. So, I mean...
Thank you. Councillor Hanford.
Cool, thanks, Terry. Thanks, Ninka. I just have a question around kind of council's emissions reduction journey. Wondering if you can kind of clarify, because although this isn't necessarily going to give us big wins in that space, what does the journey look like to find avenues to reduce electricity usage, and also ensuring climate considerations are coming through agenda templates and those kinds of things? I'm wondering whether you could speak briefly on that.
Yeah, this doesn't impact directly on our emissions pathway. If we were able to significantly reduce our electricity usage, then that would be one way. As you remember, in the last report, we looked at one of the advantages of going with Meridian could have been that we could buy renewable energy certificates through them and possibly get a lower emissions factor as a result. That was the advice that we were receiving from Toitu at the time. Toitu has since clarified its advice and said that because of the kind of things we signalled in their paper in December, that they weren't convinced that the renewable energy electricity certificate scheme was a positive step forward, and so they have decided not to offer reduced emissions factors if you purchase those certificates. So at the moment, that's in abeyance. There are a couple of main reasons around why that scheme doesn't really sort of meet the requirements that Toitu would have around that, and I explained those in the paper last time as caveats. There is the potential that scheme may mature over the next 3 years, and those certificates could come back on the table as an option for reducing our electricity emissions, but at the moment, it's not clear that that's likely to happen. One of the main reasons is that the certificates are issued for historical renewable electricity generation, not for new additional electricity generation, which is what we need to see to move the country as a whole towards a higher proportion of renewables. So that's one thing that might need to change. The other one is that at the moment, certificates that are issued to people, if they were to give them a lower grid emissions factor, there's no offset to that in terms of a higher grid emissions factor for those that don't purchase those certificates. So there's an implicit element of potential double counting in there, where some people would benefit, some organisations that purchase those certificates would benefit from having renewable generation as their source of supply. Other organisations that don't have that wouldn't have any penalty, and so they still benefit from the average grid emissions factor, which includes that renewable generation. I hope that's not too confusing.
Terry, I think Sean wants to add something to that, and then we'll come to Councillor Compton. Okay.
Yes, kia ora. As to the other question, we will brief Council next week Tuesday. Brandy will be here to update you on everything climate change, so the report question we can address there as well. And then Terry will be planning a briefing probably in June. We're trying to balance LTP workload and come back on the full program that we're doing for emissions reductions.
Thanks, thank you. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, who's our existing contract with? Because Meridian's 100% renewable generated, as far as I understand it, unless they run out of hydropower or can't produce as much due to needing to preserve water. But yeah, so who are we currently with, and do they have a similar renewable footprint as?
We're currently with Contact, and yeah, I'm not sure what their proportion of renewables is, but one of the things that's come about as a result of these recent changes in the market is that both Contact and Meridian have announced that they're going to go ahead with some of the renewable energy generation projects they had on their books. They'd been sitting on for a while because the market was relatively stable, and now that it's not and that prices are rising, they see that there's real opportunity there to step into that space. So that will improve the outlook going forward, and potentially for council as well, because to the extent that the country as a whole has more renewable generation, we have a lower grid emissions factor applied to our use of electricity.
Councillor Elliott.
Oh, thank you. Nikki, we had requested that that update be take place next Thursday, not Tuesday. I just wanted to clarify that because it's showing on Thursday now on my calendar.
So there are two briefings next week. One is by Brandy Griffin on climate change on Tuesday, and the second one is everything waste minimisation by Ruth on Thursday.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, I don't see any further questions. We have the recommendations on page 70. Recommendation 42. Do we have someone that wants to move? Councillor Compton, thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Hanford. Right of introduction? No, it's waived. Open it up for debate. There is none. I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, and carried. Thanks very much, Terry. And Ninka. And all right, we're getting through, team. Almost there. We've got next up is Hamish with the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, found on page 83. Good to see you, Hamish. I think house prices have gone up probably 20% since we last saw you, maybe more. Yeah, that is probably true. Page 83, team, and just welcome Hamish to the table to walk us through the report.
Morning, Mr Chair, Mayor, Councillors. This is the third quarterly report on the National Policy Statement on Urban Developments. As you'll be familiar, it typically provides an update on our building consent and resource consent activity, alongside with a number of indicators that are identified from the Ministry for Urban Development's website, including typically about some of the rises in house prices, affordability indexes and others. Unfortunately, this quarter, the dashboard information hasn't been updated in time. It's currently been updated at the moment and is due to be out next week. So we haven't been able to include a great deal of additional context in this report, but we'll look to update that in the next one coming through. But what we have included in this report is update for that consenting activity from the December, January, February period that we've just been through, where overall some of the numbers seem fairly reflective of the same period last year. And obviously, given it spans a Christmas period, there's a bit of a dip in activity that we saw leading up to that Christmas period. But otherwise, I will take the report as read and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Hamish. Quick look around the room. There's nothing coming up on the screen yet. Any questions? Councillor McCann.
Sure. Thank you very much, Hamish. When that information does come through, are we able to get that part of the information updated or just sent through rather than the full report?
It's publicly available when it is updated, so I can certainly send you the link to the dashboard and the information to draw down. If you're happy to circumnavigate your way around it, it's reasonably well usable, friendly website. So I can let you know when that's available and flick you through a link if that's amenable.
Thank you. And when we're looking at the Ministry of Social Development's housing register, the trends, have we spoken to our local agencies to discuss how they feel the trends reflect what they're seeing?
So the purpose of this report is to meet our requirements under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. So there is set data we need to report on when it becomes available. So that is primarily the purpose of this report, is to meet that statutory requirement. There is other work going on. We can provide you with information in relation to social housing register tracking offline.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. Councillor, would you? Oh, His Worship the Mayor.
Just in response to Councillor McCann, in my brief conversation with the Regional MSD Commissioner, Katie Brosnan, they are preparing some kind of statement in that question that you raised.
Thank you, Worship. Councillor McCann, would you like to, given there's no further questions, move the recommendations? 16 and 17 on page 84, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Right of introduction.
I'll waive that because Judy's indicated.
Waived. Any further debate? There is none. I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, and that is carried. Thanks very much, Hamish. All right, team, and so the last one on the agenda is the confirmation of minutes found on, well, the recommendations on page 94 for the minutes, the 18th of March. Thank you, Councillor Randall. But before you do that, we've got is it a comment or a question, Mr. Burns? Because it's
both.
It needs to be a question. You can provide a comment in debate.
No, it's a question.
Okay.
Do you realise that on page 95 we have extra community board members who I'm not aware of in attendance?
Would you mind just pointing out in terms of which ones are the...
In attendance, the heading attendance, there's extra community board members, which I don't believe are community board members.
I think it's possibly in the way that it is worded, but...
There needs a full stop.
Yeah. All right, we'll address that offline. Tanika's made note of that, so thank you for raising that. And so I don't see any further names on the screen, so moved by Councillor Randall, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion? There is none. All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, carried. And I'll just go back to the top of the agenda, and I think that is the end. As we move to public speaking time, and there is none. And so I call the meeting to a close. And thank you all for your participation. And thanks for the staff system. Done. 10 to 12.
Council 1:30.